Owen Calloway was 42 years old, the kind of man who could spend 4 hours on a single watch movement without once checking the clock on the wall. He wore the same watch every day, his grandfather's, the crystal scratched, the leather band replaced so many times it barely matched the case anymore, and never once explained to anyone why he refused to clean it up. On a Wednesday evening in November, at the kitchen counter, with the separation paperwork spread between them, Claire glanced at his wrist and laughed. "You're still wearing that broke old thing?" she said. "I'm taking the house, Owen. Try not to embarrass yourself with whatever you think that's worth." She said it lightly, the way a person says something they've already decided is funny and true at the same time. Owen didn't answer right away. She had no idea how wrong she actually was. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The kitchen smelled like the dinner neither of them had finished. The particular quiet of a room where two people have stopped pretending they're having a conversation. Owen had spent 23 years inside a trade most people never thought twice about until something stopped working. Watchmaking. The kind that involves loops and tweezers and parts smaller than a grain of rice. Learned at his grandfather's bench starting when he was 9 years old. He ran Calloway Horology out of a narrow storefront downtown, the same shop his grandfather had opened in 1971, and he drove a 2009 Honda Civic with 250,000 miles on it, because spending money on a car had never once struck him as worth doing. He wore a canvas apron at work that had outlived 3 previous ones. He ate lunch at his bench, standing, most days, because sitting down for it felt like a luxury he hadn't earned yet. He was the kind of man who could tell you, without looking twice, exactly what was wrong with something most people had already given up on. 9 years earlier, when Claire was finishing her real estate license and the market had gone cold right when she needed it warm, Owen had quietly covered both their bills for 14 months on the shop's thin margins, picked up restoration contracts from 2 estate auction houses on top of his regular work, and never once mentioned how close to the edge it had actually gotten. She'd thanked him for it once, the week she closed her first sale, and never brought it up again. He had no idea, that Wednesday evening, just how literally wrong her math was about to turn out to be. Then came November. Everything that followed traced back to that counter. The overhead light in the kitchen had been left on at full brightness, the kind of bright that makes paperwork look more official than it is. Claire had laid the separation documents out in 3 careful stacks before Owen even sat down, the stacks of someone who'd rehearsed the order she wanted to go through them in. "I've thought about this for a long time," she said. "I'm being honest with you for the first time in longer than I want to admit." Owen set his coffee mug down on the counter. He didn't say anything yet. "Grant's been showing me what's possible," she said. "New construction. Real equity. You spend your whole life fixing things nobody under 60 cares about anymore." She glanced at his wrist again. "I deserve someone who's actually building something, Owen. I think you already know that." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm taking the house," she said, sliding 1 stack toward him. "You can keep your tools. Keep that." She nodded at his wrist. "Try not to embarrass yourself with whatever you think it's worth." Owen didn't raise his voice. He didn't tell her what the watch actually was, because the answer wouldn't change what he was about to do next, and because some things, once said out loud in anger, can't be taken back into the quiet they came from. He stood very still and let the silence take up the space where his reaction would have gone. What he did notice, the way he noticed a hairline scratch on a crystal most people would never catch, was the name printed at the top of the 3rd document, a pre-approval letter from a regional bank, dated 6 weeks earlier, listing Claire and a man named Grant Ellison as joint applicants for a construction loan on a lot 2 counties over. He said nothing about it. He filed it the way he filed anything that didn't add up yet. Not yet. I'm not asking you to fight me on the house, Claire said. I'm telling you, because I owe myself that much honesty. You were never going to be more than a man fixing watches in a shop your grandfather built. I need someone who's still building something. Owen picked up his keys from the counter. He squared the corner of the paperwork stack she'd pushed toward him, out of habit more than composure, though it would look like the second thing to anyone watching. I'll be at the shop, he said. He drove the 12 minutes there in silence and let himself in through the back, the smell of machine oil and old brass settling something in him that the kitchen hadn't. The rest could wait. It usually could. 11 years before that Wednesday, Owen's grandfather Theodore had handed him the watch from a hospital bed 2 days before he died. A 1968 reference with a cream dial that had gone soft and honey-colored with age, the kind collectors call tropical when the discoloration happens evenly. Don't ever let anyone tell you what something's worth just by looking at it, Theodore had said. Most people can't read past the surface. That's not your problem to fix. Owen had worn it every day since, deliberately scuffed, deliberately unremarkable, because the last thing he wanted was for anyone to ask. He'd spent the years since building something quieter alongside the shop, a discreet sourcing and authentication practice for serious collectors, the kind of clients who found him through other collectors rather than a storefront sign. He never advertised it. He never mentioned the commissions, some of them 6 figures, that occasionally came through for tracking down a missing provenance document or authenticating a movement nobody else could place. It hadn't seemed worth bringing up at home. Claire had never asked what the back office of the shop was actually for. He'd noticed things shifting before that Wednesday. Claire's open houses running later than the listings explained. A new habit of stepping outside to take calls. A name that started appearing in her calendar with a frequency that didn't match a typical client. He'd told himself it was the market picking back up. He extended the kind of patience he'd give a movement that wasn't running quite right yet, but hadn't actually stopped. Not because he hadn't noticed, but because he believed in what they'd built enough to assume it could survive a rough season. A longtime client named Edmund Reyes, a retired collector who'd been bringing Owen pieces for 15 years, had told him once that Owen had an eye most professional appraisers spent entire careers trying to develop. The ability to look at something everyone else had already dismissed and see exactly what it actually was. Owen hadn't thought much of the compliment at the time. He filed it the way he filed everything. That was the part Claire had never bothered to ask about. By the time she laid 3 stacks of paperwork on the kitchen counter, the watch on his wrist had already been quietly appraised. She'd find out the rest of it later, in a room she didn't choose. Owen didn't go home that night. He drove to Dolores Voss's house instead, the way he had a handful of times over the years whenever something needed sorting that he couldn't sort standing at a workbench. Dolores was 66, small and composed, with silver hair she kept cut short for practicality. She'd spent 28 years as an estate settlement clerk before retiring, and for the past decade she'd kept Owen's books, his client contracts, and, more than either of them ever said out loud, a careful eye on the parts of his life he was too busy fixing other people's things to manage himself. She opened the door already holding 2 mugs of tea. "Sit down," she said. "Eat something first. Then we'll talk." He sat. "I'm going to lay this out in order," Dolores said, once there was a plate in front of him he wasn't going to touch. "I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything back." She opened a folder she'd clearly had ready longer than he wanted to think about. The first page was a printout of Claire's calendar, shared years ago for scheduling convenience and never revoked, showing appointments labeled G. E, appearing twice weekly for the past 5 months, always outlasting any reasonable showing time. Owen looked at the pattern. He said nothing. "There's more," Dolores said. She slid the next document across, the construction loan pre-approval Owen had already glimpsed at the kitchen counter, except this version showed the full file. Grant Ellison, listed occupation, developer. Down payment source, anticipated proceeds from marital property settlement, estimated $410,000. "They've already spent her half of the house before the ink's dry on anything," Dolores said. Owen reached for his tea, more to have something to do with his hands than because he wanted it. "How long has the lot been under contract?" he asked. "Since August," Dolores said. "Before either of you sat down with an attorney." She set down a third document, closing paperwork from a similar deal Grant Ellison had walked away from 2 years earlier, when a different girlfriend's divorce settlement fell through, and the financing he'd lined up around it collapsed with it. This wasn't a man building a future with Claire. It was a man who needed her settlement to exist, and had needed something just like it before. Owen stood and walked to the window, looking at all 3 documents the way he'd look at a watch laid open on his bench, not at any single component first, but at the whole movement until he could see how every piece engaged the next. He could see exactly how it fit together, the calendar pattern. The loan dated months before any settlement conversation, the prior collapse that meant Grant needed this one to work. He could see the entire mechanism now. Every gear, every point where one piece drove the next. "I'm sorry," Dolores said. "Don't be," Owen said. "You gave me exactly what I needed." He didn't act immediately. Marcus Albrecht, the attorney who'd handled Owen's estate work for years, had already started reviewing the separation paperwork before Owen formally called him. Dolores had reached out 2 days earlier, trusting him enough not to wait for permission. Within a week, Marcus had identified that Claire's draft settlement explicitly waived any claim to personal property items, including jewelry, timepieces, and collectibles held in Owen's name, language Claire's own attorney had inserted, confident there was nothing in that category worth contesting. Marcus called Owen at 7:15 one morning, the hour he did most of his real work, because the work didn't keep daylight hours. An appraiser named Geoffrey Marsh, a specialist Owen had worked with twice before through Hargrove and Stein auctioneers, came in the following week. He spent 3 days examining the watch under proper conditions, provenance documents Theodore had kept since 1971, the original receipt, 2 prior service records, and returned with a formal written estimate. The watch, a 1968 reference in exceptional original condition with a documented chain of ownership, carried a pre-sale auction estimate between $1,200,000 and $1,500,000. The house, by comparison, had an appraised market value of $612,000. Claire called Owen twice that week before the formal numbers had reached her side. Owen let both calls go to voicemail. Her first message sounded breezy, almost generous. She wanted to keep things simple, she said, since he didn't seem interested in fighting over the house anyway. Her second message, recorded the next afternoon, had a different register entirely. She'd apparently heard, secondhand, that someone matching Geoffrey Marsh's description had been seen at the shop. She asked carefully whether there was anything she should know about. Owen listened to both messages once each. He noted the shift the same way he'd note a hairline crack appearing in a crystal under magnification. He didn't call back yet. He didn't move fast. That was the part Claire had never found a way to account for. She had spent months deciding what kind of man she was dealing with, and she had gotten the central thing wrong. She'd read his quietness as the limit of what he actually had. It wasn't. Reading what something was actually worth underneath what it looked like on the surface was the one skill Owen had spent his entire life building. She had simply never had a reason to watch him use it on something that was his. 3 weeks after the kitchen counter, Owen called her himself. His voice was level. Cooperative, even. He told her he was ready to finalize the settlement exactly as she drafted it, and that he'd have Marcus arrange a signing with both attorneys present so it could be handled cleanly. "That's good to hear," Claire said, too quickly. He could hear the relief she was trying to keep out of her voice, the relief of someone who believed the only real asset in the marriage was already secured. "Friday," Owen said. 11 o'clock. "At your lawyer's office?" "No," he said. "Hargrove and Stein. They've got a conference room we can use." She didn't ask why an auction house had a conference room relevant to a divorce settlement. He didn't tell her. He ended the call. Marcus was sitting across the table from him, watching. "She thinks this is already settled," Owen said. Marcus said nothing. He refilled Owen's tea. Owen reached the conference room at Hargrove and Stein 18 minutes before anyone was expected. He preferred it that way. The room was the kind of space auction houses build to look serious without trying too hard. A long table, soft overhead light angled to flatter whatever sat beneath it, framed sale results from past seasons lining one wall. Owen had been in that exact room 3 days earlier, the day Jeffrey's written estimate was finalized and entered into the file. Nobody outside that file had seen it yet. That was about to change. Marcus arrived at 10:51 with Jeffrey Marsh beside him, a single folder between them. Nothing about either of them suggested urgency. The folder had taken 3 weeks to build. It didn't need to look heavy to be heavy. Claire walked in at 11 o'clock with her attorney. She glanced at Owen once, a brief, satisfied look, the kind she might give a competitor she'd already beaten. Then her attention went to the framed sale results on the wall, the way a person's eyes go to numbers they assume have nothing to do with them. Marcus opened the meeting himself. "Before we move to signatures," he said, "there are several matters that require acknowledgement by everyone present." He set the first document on the table, unhurried. The draft settlement, as written, awards the marital residence to Mrs. Calloway and waives her claim to all personal property held in Mr. Calloway's name, specifically including timepieces and collectibles. "I want to confirm that language is intentional before anyone signs." "It is," Claire's attorney said, glancing at Claire. "We've reviewed it." Claire's expression didn't move. Not yet. Jeffrey placed the second document beside the first, the formal written appraisal, provenance file attached. The pre-sale estimate stated plainly at the top. "The item in question is a 1968 reference currently worn by Mr. Calloway," Jeffrey said, without inflection. "Hargrove and Stein's pre-sale estimate is $1,200,000 to $1,500,000, based on condition and documented provenance dating to original purchase." Claire's attorney looked up from the page. Whatever ease he'd arrived with had left his face entirely. "The current appraised value of the residence," Marcus continued, "is $612,000. I want the record to reflect that Mrs. Calloway's attorney drafted and Mrs. Calloway reviewed a waiver of claim to an asset worth more than double the property she retained prior to either party having access to this appraisal." The room went quiet for what felt like a long time. Owen counted it. 7 seconds. "You knew," Claire said, quietly, not a question. "I had it appraised," Owen said. "I didn't know what you'd decide to waive." Claire didn't say anything else. Owen watched something behind her eyes recalculate the last 9 months in real time. The lot under contract. The down payment that depended on a number that was never going to be there. The watch she'd told him not to embarrass himself over. We'll allow time for review before signatures, Marcus said. Owen stood. He hadn't brought anything to the table beyond the one folder, and it had already done what it came to do. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Marcus's hand, then Joffrey's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He spoke to Claire directly, not loudly, not for the room. For her. You told me not to embarrass myself with what I thought it was worth, he said. I never told you what I thought. I just let the paperwork say it. He walked out. He didn't look back. It didn't unravel all at once. Grant Ellison's construction loan fell through within 3 weeks, once his lender's underwriting team requested updated proof of the anticipated settlement funds and received documentation showing the actual division of assets instead. He stopped taking Claire's calls before the lot's contract contingency even expired. People who still talked to Owen about things they probably shouldn't have said Grant had moved on to a different listing agent within the month. Claire's situation compressed the way a structure does when its foundation turns out to be smaller than the building resting on it. She kept the house, exactly as she'd insisted, and discovered within the year that a $600,000 property with a mortgage, on a single income, in a market that had cooled since the appraisal, was not the asset she believed she was winning. She listed it for sale the following spring. It sat on the market 4 months longer than she'd projected. Owen kept building. He didn't sell the watch. He'd never intended to. Instead, he used the appraisal itself, the credibility it lent the shop's quiet sourcing practice, to formalize what had been a back-office sideline into a proper authentication consultancy. Callaway Horology added 2 employees within the year, both former apprentices he'd trained himself. He returned every client message the same day he received it. He gave timelines and met every one of them, the way he always had. 14 months after the conference room at Hargrove & Stein, Owen finally did something he'd put off since his grandfather's bench. He had the crystal on the watch professionally polished, the decades of deliberate scuffing buffed away for the first time. The cream dial left exactly as it was, tropical and honest and untouched. He didn't need it to look unremarkable anymore. On a quiet Tuesday morning in March, Owen stood at his workbench with the shop's front door still locked. Sunlight coming low through the front window and landing across a row of watches waiting for him in their trays. He picked up the first one of the day, an old chronograph a young woman had brought in the week before. Certain it was beyond saving, certain it wasn't worth what it would cost to fix. He turned it over once in his hand, set his loupe to his eye, and got to work. His own watch caught the light as he leaned over the bench. The crystal was clear now. Nobody walking past the window would have called it broke. He kept working. The shop stayed quiet around him. The good kind of quiet. And the only sound for a long while was the small, even tick of something running exactly the way it was supposed to. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.